Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. The Republican Party has found the Achilles heel of the Biden economy: expensive burritos. This week, the popular fast food chain Chipotle announced they are raising prices to cover the cost of increasing wages for their employees. Heaven forbid. Now, the price increase is all of 4%. Prices vary by location, but that basically means is if your Chipotle burrito used to cost, say, $10, it will be going up to $10.40. And if your side of guac and chips would go from $4.70 to $4.89. Color me a little skeptical that that is going to be the deciding factor in the midterm elections. Oh, and never mind the fact that Chipotle raked in $6 billion last year, paid their CEO $38 million. But you can understand why Republicans want to run with this. This is from the National Republican Congressional Committee website. Your burrito just got more expensive. Now, this is a core animating issue of the right, of conservatives, has been for decades, if not centuries. Business owners and titans of capital and right-wing parties scaremongering about inflation and wages going up too high and the connections between the two. And inflation is going up. You've probably noticed it in your daily life. There's new data out today showing the Consumer Price Index, basically just the average price of a bunch of stuff, is up 5% since May of last year across the basket of items that they monitor. That's the fastest rate of growth since 2008. Now, as we talked about previously on this show, a lot of that seems to be transitory, with the strangeness of this economy coming back to life after more than a year of a pandemic. I mean, back in May of 2020, for instance, a lot of things like, airfare and car rentals were really cheap because there was zero demand for them. As we get back to normal, demand and prices are back up. And in many cases, we have a kind of mismatch, right, between the demand and the available supply, how many cars there are on the market, for instance. There is a good reason to think a lot of that mismatch is going to go away. And that's the bet the Biden administration and the Federal Reserve are making. The deeper issue here that is really animating the Republican Party and the CEO class is the fact that labor is scarce right now. It is hard to find people to hire.
The unemployment rate dropping to 5.8% in the May jobs report, yet companies still say they are desperate to find workers.
The chamber is out with a new report today calling the worker shortage a, quote, national economic crisis.
At the very moment that unemployment is rising, fewer people are working, American businesses say they can't find employees.
This labor force problem isn't just limited to the restaurant and service industries. It's impacting businesses across the board, including construction.
Right now, we are struggling with employees. The workforce has been paralyzed.
Across Texas, restaurants are hiring and getting creative to fill positions. This one's offering room and board, and many now have sign-on bonuses to sweeten the deal for job seekers.
At Dot's Diner in New Orleans, you used to be able to get sizzling bacon, eggs, and grits 24 hours a day. But now?
I'm 20 employees short right now to be able to open 24 hours.
Hungry customers are filling booths, but co-owner Mark Brasso can't fill shifts.
Why do you think people aren't applying?
Obviously, in my opinion, is the fact that they're making as much money staying home on unemployment than they would at being back to work.
Now, there's a lot of people who think that way, and the data on that doesn't paint a very clear picture. But if you're the boss and you're looking to hire people, yes, it is easier if labor is plentiful because then it is cheap. And then you can have your pick. A lot of people will apply to fill your position at your diner, and you can say, I like this person and not that person. When the labor market is not like that, when labor is scarce, you have to hustle. Or you may have to do something even worse, raise wages. But for Republicans, conservatives, most bosses, CEOs, you can tell from their burrito freakout, raising wages is not something they want to do. Here's how the former economic advisor to President Ronald Reagan put it.
For those people, Sandra, who are coming into the labor force brand fresh, not old-timers who've been around for a while, the poor, the minorities, the disenfranchised, those with less education, young people who haven't had the job experience, these people aren't worth $15 an hour in most cases.
Oh, well, he just came out and said it. The poor, the minorities, the disenfranchised, young, they're not worth it. I'm afraid you're wrong, Art, because the economy is this is how it is. Labor is scarce. Some are having to do just that. Some businesses have, quote, found a way around the worker shortage, which is raising wages to $15 an hour or more. like the owner of a Pittsburgh ice cream parlor, whose job posting for scoopers at $7.25 an hour plus tips did not produce a single application between January and March. So he decided to more than double the starting wage to $15 an hour plus tips just to see what would happen. The shop was suddenly flooded with applications, more than 1,000 piled in over the course of a week. This is, of course, elemental economics. When something is plentiful, it's likely going to be cheap. When it is scarce, it's going to cost more money. So another way to say labor shortage is just to say worker power. And worker power has been largely missing from the U.S. economy for literally 40 years, if not more. Since the Reagan era and the last great bout of inflation, right, in the late 70s, when the Federal Reserve's response induced a punishing recession, we have seen a vast transformation of the American and global economy. We created, in Reagan's shadow, a new economy that offers this bargain. Consumer goods are cheap, everything from burritos to flat screen TVs to all the stuff you could buy on Amazon or in a Target because it's made by people in other countries making very little money. Globalization brought all these inexpensive goods, cheaper than they've ever been, to our door. For years, people defending this model have said, look how cheap the TVs are. How can you say people are poor when they have smartphones? But there's another part of this bargain. The key part of the bargain is the cheap goods go together with low wages, right? Because you're getting those goods from folks making very little money, but as a worker, you're also competing with them. And the only things that are not cheap on top of it all are the pillars of middle-class life. Education gets more expensive every year, as does housing, and as does healthcare. We might be on the precipice of a momentous change right now. We transform that bargain away from cheap consumer goods and a low-wage economy to a high-wage economy. And that might mean that burritos cost $10.40 instead of just $10. It may also mean you buy a new television less often, and that other consumer goods cost a bit more. Some services might cost more. There might be a trade-off like that. Economics is about trade-offs. I think it's a trade-off most Americans are willing to make. In fact, if Americans agree on one thing overwhelmingly in a very polarized era where no one agrees on anything, it's raising the minimum wage. 62% of U.S. adults support raising the federal minimum wage to $15 an hour, according to a recent survey. And in fact, if you go back to that Republican Party post, right, if you reverse the Republican Party's messaging on the expensive burrito, their promise is essentially, we will bring down the wages of Chipotle workers. And if you put it that way, it doesn't sound so appealing, does it?